Wow, let's try to have a teeny bit as much fun.
I didn't bring my
just said on that
soundtrack.
last panel, we don't have any soundtracks, but I have some fun topics to talk to you about.
Excellent. Excellent.
So we'll start by talking about your arrival in Detroit post-bankruptcy, almost as happy of a topic.
That's right.
So your goal in coming to Detroit was, among other things, to grow its population and its development at a time when a lot of other cities are seeing some adverse consequences to doing some of those very same things in the form of displacement, inequality, et cetera. In fact, already in Detroit, there's kind of this narrative that's developed of two Detroits that reflects some of the more high-end development that's emerged in the city at the same time as other parts could be called languishing. So how will you do things differently?
Right. Well, I think from the very beginning, the mayor said he wanted a planning director who was a champion of neighborhoods. So I had my direction from the very first meeting, and it was an interesting challenge. Could we grow, but could we do so inclusively? Could we retain the people who are here and create one of the most inclusive recoveries that America has seen? So I thought that was a gigantuan challenge, but one that my experience has prepared me for, primarily because the only people you can really plan for are the people who are already here. And Detroit is quite blessed to have that kind of cross-section of demographics, of people who have long tenures here and who have a clear notion about what they want their community to be. And so how do you begin to engage people in a conversation about neighborhoods, the places that they live, but to do so with some shared collective vision, which means you have to engage people at the deepest level, and that's what we set out to begin to do.
Yeah, I want to talk about engagement in a minute, but let's talk about that experience you referenced. So among other things, you were mayor briefly of Charlottesville at a time when they were going through, I believe, becoming maybe from a city to a town, and then New Orleans post-Katrina. So what made you decide to come to Detroit, and what were you expecting?
Well, I certainly wasn't expecting to be a part of this recovery. It was an amazing, once, I think, in a lifetime opportunity. But I brought with me some skills that I think were appropriate for this challenge. One is you cannot recover a city without good governance. And Charlottesville was known for an active engagement of residents. So I actually came away from that experience understanding that residents have the ability to kind of correct the course of a discipline, kind of ground truth an idea. And so I came really attuned to the notion that you will be judged by what you actually implement, not by what you plan. And so there's a real focus on doing things that change the quality of life of people in real time. And you'll see that manifest in the projects that we do. I think in New Orleans, understanding the cultural climate of a place and that there's an authenticity of place that you absolutely have to capture. And there's no place probably in America more pronounced of that culture than a city like New Orleans. So it was wonderful to come to a city that certainly has no kind of complex or identity complex. I mean, this is a city that knows that it's been one of America's major cities. And I think it's a lot of times it's a lot easier to recapture greatness if you know you were great once upon a time. So Detroit has no identity crisis in that regard. And so the foundation was all there to have this miraculous recovery that I think we're all witnessing.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get into the nitty-gritty a little bit. So part of your plan is identifying particular neighborhoods. Tell me a bit about how you picked those neighborhoods, and let's take a look at a map of where those are located in the city.
Right. I think Dan Gilbert referenced to a city within a city. Well, I think it's actually cities within a city. And so what you're looking at is an archipelago of neighborhoods, neighborhood geographies, where we have started this strategy of exploring what the future of neighborhoods is like. And just as we have one of the premier collection of 20th century skyscrapers in our downtown, we actually have an extraordinary collection of historic neighborhoods. And these are the parts of the city that are most populated. They have single-family fabric that's largely intact. They have commercial corridors that run through them. People used to do all of their shopping on those corridors. And it's simply the place, if you want to start from strengths, you start here. And so this is, I say, the future of neighborhoods phase 1. And then all of those other areas, we think we will learn lessons of how to bring a successful strategy of neighborhoods together, and we'll apply that to the next crop of neighborhoods and the next crop of neighborhoods until we've gone through the entire city.
And did you encounter any negative reaction to your selection of maybe neighborhoods with some inherent advantage?
Sure. Well, I think the challenge in Detroit, it's a kind of a show-me kind of city.
Yeah.
People have seen plans after plans after plan. What they have not seen is the capacity to implement. And so we have something that we have to prove, that the city can not only plan with people, but we can execute exquisitely.
Yeah.
And so the nice thing about the recovery that you've seen in the downtown is that it has set an extremely high bar of a public expectation of what excellence looks like. And we've used that high bar to say, well, if it works, if we can create that kind of excellence and innovation downtown, can we do the same in your typical Detroit neighborhood? And for that, you really, I have to put a focus on innovation, because we're talking about assets that are sometimes unconventional, like lots of land or very little market, and yet that's what you have to work with.
Yeah. Okay, so let's now delve to the next level and talk about one neighborhood. You have a number of strategies that you're planning to implement in any given place, so we're pulling up an image that will illustrate some of those components. Can you talk a little bit about what's displayed here?
Sure. So this is a neighborhood that's easily 6 miles from downtown, so it doesn't benefit from downtown adjacencies and the kind of recovery that downtowns are known for. It is a neighborhood of about a quarter square mile. It had over 120 vacant houses, still had about 600 households that lived there, and it had about 300 vacant lots that constituted about 20 acres of vacant land. And so how do you go into a neighborhood and create a blight-free quarter square mile where every single house has been renovated with a range of affordability, and every vacant lot has a design for a garden that actually curates the vacant land in a neighborhood. It did not have a central park, so could you creatively pull together vacant lots across streets and alleys and create a multi-acre park, and then connect that to by a greenway, a walking and biking trail that laces the vacant lots all together to connect to the University of Detroit Mercy, which is just outside of this neighborhood, and Marygrove College. And do this with the consent of the residents who are there. So no small feat, dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings, but I'm happy to say that the park is open. The Greenway is going to be under construction. The first 50 flowering meadows of the neighborhood are under construction. And you can begin to see what I mean by coming to a neighborhood not with the conventional set of tools, but a set of tools that are place-based. If the assets are land, then you come and try to create an innovative strategy that's land-based. If their assets are these historic homes, then you start there. You don't come in and build new single-family houses. And what I probably haven't mentioned, this is a neighborhood where the median household income is $30,000. So to bring these kind of innovative tools and these kind of resources to a demographic of that type, in and of itself says The folks who are there are worth it. They have the same value, and we're going to expend the same kind of creative energy we do in our downtown in a typical neighborhood.
So you mentioned consent or community engagement. That's where it gets a little sticky, huh?
Right.
So I know there's a lot of examples in your work of how you engage with the community. An interesting one, I think, to start with is the riverfront. For those who are here in Detroit, we are all seeing it right in front of us, so we can kind of understand a little bit about that. And one of the things that you did as part of thinking about developing the riverfront is to ask the community what they wanted out of it, and tell me about how that process went.
Sure. I mean, that's a really fascinating project because, you know, a riverfront, you need a 30-year vision. You need something really long-term that those who are interested in investing can see what the future is. But it ultimately comes down to a set of deliverable projects. So it was about streets, streetscapes. It was about greenways and parks. It was about preserving the historic heritage of the riverfront and about creating truly a mixed income riverfront. So part of our challenge was, how do you create an inclusive riverfront? How do you say to folks who don't live on the riverfront, you are welcome? And so we found there are these historic greenways that actually pass through subsidized housing developments that were built in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't so much their proximity to the riverfront is pretty clear, but for them to get to it, they would have to jump over, you know, a fence, go through a private parking lot, and get to the riverfront. So what we did was we decided that the first capital investment was going to go into reimagining those greenways, buying right-of-ways from the private sector to create gateways for people that literally physically said, this riverfront is for you. We also went into Jefferson, which was functioning as a 9-lane street, severing those neighborhoods from the riverfront. And we went in and we reduced it to 5 lanes, put on-street parking and protected bike lanes on this street. And it, you know, we got a lot of pushback because people wondered, who is this for? Who rides bikes? Well, the cross-section of Detroit that's on that street has surprised everyone. We have people with electric scooters who are using it. We have elderly who are walking side by side, so they don't have to navigate the ups and downs of the sidewalk. And it's a very clear demonstration of what the future is going to be like, that it's going to be equitable. And by the way, in a 30-year vision, you're going to see something in 18 months. And so learning again, putting things out there, showing people that change is possible, and showing that this actually will belong to them was an important lesson that we brought from the riverfront studies and now into the neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's really interesting that access was ultimately the key
That's right.
takeaway. So what do you do when you run into trouble with communities?
I put on my armor every morning and go out to fight another fight. I believe fundamentally that people are very intelligent and capable of learning new things. We simply have to have the patience to both listen to their voices, which again, it's a collective process, but also to not be afraid to challenge them with new ideas. And that's been one of the big surprises. People actually respect the fact that you respect their creativity, their intelligence, and that you're willing to bring them ideas that might challenge them a little far. And then you're willing to work with them over the course of time to deliver that to the point where they feel authorship of those strategies.
You told me before we came out here that when you came into office, you increased your staff from 6 to 40, I believe.
That's right.
So what do you expect Detroit to look like in 20 years with that investment?
Wow. Well, first of all, I wouldn't advise anyone try this unless you're willing to put in those kind of resources. They're architects, they're landscape architects, they're city planners, they're historic preservationists. I think we are bound to create one of the most inclusive recoveries this country has ever seen. That's what it will look like for me.
You heard it here first. Thank you so much, Maurice.
All right, thank you.